Yeah, hello. My name's Luke McBain. Together with Chad McBain, we are two brothers in Bitcoin. And today, Chad, you brought us some interesting news of all places, of course, from Russia. How else should it be? Let me see if I find it. Uh, yeah, there it is. There it is. There it is. Putin signs Bitcoin mining crypto taxation law. So Putin does again nasty things, apparently. No, I don't know. I'm just kidding here. I don't really, well, it's fairly simple. The law integrates crypto transaction and foreign trade into the general tax base. Crypto miners must register with Russia's Federal Tax Service. Okay, pretty simple, straightforward. So, signed the law introducing taxation on income, expenses derived from digital currency, mining, purchase, and sale. So every time you sell or buy Bitcoin, you are taxed. Recognize digital currency as property under the tax code. I suppose that's the news because one can say, okay, it's good that something is being regulated, but we were just talking about taxation in the previous podcast, that's one of the few ways states try to get a hold on Bitcoin is to say, okay, we're just going to tax this thing and perhaps make it unattractive. So why do you think is this interesting news?
Well, I think Russia has gone from basically banning Bitcoin, um, and then they allowed only certain people to hold Bitcoin, and they weren't allowed to use it as a currency, but they could hold it. And those people, as you can imagine, were wealthy or politically connected. And now, based on what I'm seeing here, it's basically saying that most Russian citizens can now buy Bitcoin and hold it, still not allowed to use it as a currency. And now they're doing mining. So
Hmm.
they're gonna allow people to buy it and obviously hope that they profit from it and therefore tax it. And also, the state itself is going to be mining Bitcoin.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
So or allowing companies to mine Bitcoin, but I think it's fair to assume that those companies will have some type of state connection, you know. Um, so I found that quite interesting. And then there was another article that came out, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, so I didn't get a chance to get it to you, but now there it is there. So perfect. And it's Putin basically saying that he doesn't see the need for dollar reserves
mm,
because
right.
because your dollars could be confiscated by we know who, the U.S. government. Um, they took their foreign reserves, which I think this is not a defense of Russia in any way, shape, or form, but sovereign foreign reserves held by the central bank, the Fed, have no business being touched by anybody. Um, and so I think when the US did that, I understand the rationale behind it, but what it signals to the rest of the world is if we ever get on the wrong side of the US politically, our foreign reserves could be seized. And again, this is not a defense of Putin. I'm not going to say Russia because Russian citizens are different. This is not a defense of his administration, but I think what the West did when they froze his assets um, was basically say that nobody can really trust us if we disagree with you. And in this case, it's I think reasonable people would say it's somewhat justified, but in other cases it might not be. And I'm not going to get into too many geopolitics or foreign politics, but what I would say is countries get along one week and then they don't get along the next week. And so, do we always want to be at the mercy of whether or not we get along with somebody to depend on whether or not our foreign reserves are safe. So what Putin is suggesting here, which is the point of this podcast, is that cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin are probably better because, to use than foreign currency or than forex trading because nobody can seize them. They're decentralized protocols. So I thought that was ironic and funny, and yet at the same time, the irony is, of course, that he's right. And you and I've been talking about this for a long time. That Bitcoin is freedom for everybody, not just for the people we like, but for people we might disagree with. Because it's decentralized, your wealth, your money is safe. So I thought, in a weird way, twice in the last week, Putin has kind of endorsed Bitcoin. I don't know if that's the kind of product ambassador that we want, but it does speak to the fact that foreign nations are paying attention. And I think you might see, if Russia's doing something, if the United States is doing something, we know the U.S. is definitely in the next administration committed to seeing Bitcoin mining do well. Now Russia seems to be committed to making Bitcoin mining do well. I know we're going to get to another article shortly discussing China, but it seems like all the major players in geopolitics and global politics are now saying, well, we can't fight this Bitcoin thing. Then how do we use it to our advantage? And I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, isn't it? That is very interesting. I mean, I was also had the sensation that, all this positive news coming out of the United States in terms of Bitcoin and maybe Bitcoin becoming a strategic reserve and Trump being very positive about Bitcoin. That I'm not saying that this is a response to this, but of course, not only are we observing this space, but also other countries are observing what other countries are doing, right?
Right.
So if maybe we're witnessing some sort of beginning of a race to not to the bottom, not to the moon, but a race to Bitcoin, basically, because again, the question will be like, who will do the first, who will blink first, right? I mean, if he
Right.
says here, for example, Bitcoin, who can prohibit it? No one. He really sounds like a fervent Bitcoiner. Like somebody says, nobody can censor Bitcoin. Wow, and
Right.
as you said, like to that point, but it could also be that, yeah, of course, these actors also observing each other and trying to figure out, like, should I make the first step? Should I blink first? Should I accumulate now Bitcoin? Maybe as you're pointing out, some of them are already doing this secretly. Because if you're late in the game, if you're too early, maybe you'll make a mistake. But if you're too late, obviously the mistake will be bigger, especially if you're talking about a major power like Russia or China, who then say, well, we got to get in this because if the United States is getting into the Bitcoin space, we also have to be in that space.
Right. This is
Um,
probably a bad analogy, but I'm going to make it anyway because I can't think of another one. But this might be like iron or steel, from thousands of years ago when we learned how to make things from this. You could you could use it to build things, or you could use it as weapons. The iron or the steel was just natural minerals melted, but and then hardened. And so Bitcoin, because it's decentralized, you can use it for wealth building, but you can also use it to protect your assets. And I think what we're seeing here, and this is just my take on it, I think the U.S. is maybe looking at it in terms of, well, maybe building some wealth, but also trying to keep, they want to build their Bitcoin reserves, they say, and I think that's maybe to keep it out of the hands of others, in my opinion. And I think when that announcement was made, you probably had other powers and sovereigns and looking at that saying, well, wait a second, you know, if we weren't already doing something with Bitcoin, let's find out what's going on here and are we missing out on something? And I think in the case of both China and Russia, and I believe several countries in the Middle East, I think they were already secretly investing in buying and mining Bitcoin anyway. And so now they're just publicly stating what they were already doing to let the US know that we're not getting left behind just because you think you're going to pivot. So it's are we watching chess play out here? It seems
Mhm.
that way a little bit, you know.
Yeah, it seems so. And I mean, I think also that these bits of news are interrelated, like setting the regulatory framework on the other hand, and then basically laying the ground to be able to, as a nation, also to accumulate big Bitcoin as an option. As at least he's putting it out here on the table and
Yeah,
floating this idea. And yeah, we'll see if they act on it. Maybe they're already acting on it. Who knows?
call me a conspiracy theorist, and that's fine. But I find it interesting that the articles that we're discussing today have all come out in the last 3.5 weeks since the U.S. election. Uh,
Hmm.
so, you know, um, make of that what you will. Okay.
Speaking of China, you also mentioned China and you sent this piece of news here. Shanghai court says crypto ownership legal under China law amid Bitcoin price surge. You're laughing. Why is that funny? Why is this funny news?
Well, for anybody new to the space, that this means nothing really. But for people like you and I that have been in the space for a few years, the irony behind this is laughable because one could argue that China almost single-handedly stopped the Bitcoin bull run, if you will, in 2021 by outright banning Bitcoin mining in China. Um, and so here we are, 3.5 years later. Um, Last year, they allowed Hong Kong to open up crypto exchanges,
Okay.
and therefore Bitcoin was allowed to be traded on public exchanges in Hong Kong. And again, this is not a political channel or a political podcast. I'm not getting into the Hong Kong China thing, but I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that Hong Kong would be doing a global financial exchange without at least making sure that it was fine with Chinese authorities and the CCP. So the CCP went from banning Bitcoin in China, banning the mining operations in China, to allowing Hong Kong to do an exchange a few years later. And now we see a Shanghai court, not a Hong Kong court, but a Shanghai court saying, no, Bitcoin is legal and it is now property and you can hold it. Yeah. So again, I'm not seeing any conversation about using it as a currency, but clearly as a commodity, you're allowed to buy it and hold it, and as you would art, gold, anything else. Yeah.
It's very interesting. I don't know how the legal system works in China. I'm not an expert in that, but like my imagination tells me this decision could not have been made if it weren't for some political backing. How's that possible? Even like in some other, like in a Western democracy, you could see that the High Court might decide against
Right.
a political or policy or political decision and say, no, that's actually illegal, or no, people are allowed, according to our constitution, to do this. How this now is possible in China that a court makes this decision instead of the political level is strange to say the least. Is this again some sort of four-dimensional chess where they go like, well, we don't want to make a political statement. We'll let the court decide that and then see what happens. I mean, or is it step by step, just trying to reverse a
I,
decision without losing face, or what's going on there?
again, tinfoil hat on, so take it for what it's worth. But I point out that um, I agree with you. I don't think anything happens in China from a legal standpoint without the CCP being okay with it. And we already talked about how Hong Kong had opened up a cryptocurrency exchange last year. And I think that was okayed as well. And I think this is the same thing. And again, I point out the date 2 weeks after the US federal election had been decided.
Hmm.
So you have a presidential candidate saying, several months ago that if I win, I'm going to have a policy in regards to Bitcoin, and what the policies are remain to be seen, but it was stated that they were going to start stockpiling Bitcoin. And now we're seeing in two different articles. Um, is it fair to say that the US's biggest competitors or adversaries right now, both with Russia and China, are saying, "Hey, we're into Bitcoin too."
Wow. Yeah.
So I don't know. Like I said, that's my tinfoil hat, but I just find it interesting that they publicly come out, both of these countries, within a few weeks of the pro Bitcoin candidate winning the presidency in the United States. And
Hmm.
again, I'm not necessarily saying I'm in favor of that candidate per se. It is what it is. Donald Trump made the statements he made. His campaign made the statements that they've made. And after they won the election, we have China coming out saying, hey, we're all in on Bitcoin. And you have Russia coming out saying that not only are we all in on Bitcoin, that we think that we should be doing international trade involving Bitcoin, or at least some of it, because it can't be seized. So very interesting things from two other global powers for sure.
Yeah,
So
so let's watch the space carefully because we might be at a breaking point where these dams could just break, and then you suddenly it's declared, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to buy 500 million or 1 million Bitcoin in the next couple of years, or we already are buying that amount.
the
So
only
yeah.
the only people that could do that at this point, with the price being around $100,000 US, is mega corporations, I suppose, sovereign wealth funds, and of course countries.
Mm,
Um, and again, the irony is the country that's best positioned for that would be the U.S. because they're the ones that have the reserve currency, so they could just make more U.S. dollars to then go buy Bitcoin. So we'll see how this all plays out. I don't know what any of this means, but I certainly know that it means something. Why would you have leaders of nations talking about Bitcoin publicly
hmm.
um, if there wasn't a strategy behind that? They
Correct.
don't do things just for the sake of it.
Yeah, and sometimes they just do it to see what, if there's a ripple effect or how the
Right.
general public reacts or the press or the population, if they're in favor of this. And apparently they're getting ready for something. And I mean, it's what we said in terms of adoptions, that basically what we saw in the last cycle, like companies adopting Bitcoin or buying Bitcoin, and then we see the ETFs and the stock market going into crypto now, are now nation states going into crypto more and more, except not just El Salvador, but really these big players. We'll see.
Yeah.
There seems to be something going on. Last piece of news. Brazilian congressman introduces, and Brazil, another huge country, by the way, for those who might not know, Brazilian congressman introduced bill for national Bitcoin reserve.
Yeah.
And here again, what is quoted is also it's again, I think one has to mention this, is that this is it's just the bill is being introduced, doesn't mean it's being going to be voted or adopted as a bill, but similar to like the bill which was proposed by the Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis,
Lomas,
will
yeah.
also propose this strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? So there's that. So it's a let's say interesting suggestion. Again, if it will pass, we don't know if Brazil is now going to adopt Bitcoin or not, or have a strategic reserve, but to that point of other countries getting ready, testing the water, certain
Well, and
politicians trying to, create a profile for themselves. And
I see in
yeah.
the article two things jump out at me. One was again they mentioned Donald Trump winning in the U.S. and the mention of the national Bitcoin stockpile or reserve that the Trump campaign had discussed. The other thing they talk about El Salvador, they mentioned it in here, and of course Brazil would have a much closer look or at least observational standpoint to watch Bitcoin in use in El Salvador. Now, again, these are what would you call them? Just rumors, but it's been rumored for months that there's because Bitcoin is blockchain, we can trace where a lot of the stuff is coming from, and there's been some massive buying coming out of the Middle East over the last number of months. Let's say 6, 8 months. And we talked about this in a previous podcast too. And I should go back and find out who exactly it was. But one of the leaders of the Arab nations, and I want to say Abu Dhabi, but I could be wrong, flew to El Salvador last May to meet with President Bukele in El Salvador. And again, it's just a rumor. But what would they have to discuss? El Salvador is a tiny little nation with basically a broke economy. Um, obviously we know the Arab states are basically the opposite of that. And so people were speculating that what they had wanted to discuss was Bitcoin. You know, so we see things like that. You know what they say: don't listen to what they say, watch what they do. So we see powerful leaders of Arab states flying to El Salvador to meet with the president. We see countries introducing legislation to mimic what the U.S. is doing. We see China and Russia both saying, "Oh, we're now into Bitcoin mining. Where Bitcoin is now legal. Our citizens can now hold it as a commodity. We're going to tax profits." All of this stuff is happening within the calendar year of 2024. It's a lot going on, you know.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, for sure the tune has changed, no? I mean, at
Yeah,
least we don't know if now specific action will be taken. I mean, even here in this article it says, it's questionable if these bills will pass, but
right.
the fact that it's becoming more and more of the political discourse, especially, let's say, in a constructive way, not just in a way of saying, well, this is evil money and
Right.
only being used by criminals and other horrible people. No, there are now a lot of initiatives yeah, to discuss, should we adopt it? Should we make this productive for our country? And yeah, that certainly has changed in the last, as compared to a couple of years back. Definitely
Yeah.
has changed a lot. I mean, now we're seeing all of this activity, which would have been unthinkable 4 years ago. Completely,
And,
yeah, unthinkable. Except for El
and
Salvador, of course. That was the big
right.
exception and the big news. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first one. I would also add to that the the um, the framework by the two largest investment groups in the world, BlackRock and Fidelity, um, getting, well, I mean, they weren't the only ones, but they're certainly getting their ETFs approved late in 2023. And of course, they launched in early 24. Um, these two companies combined manage, I believe it's around $20 trillion of global assets. So I think it's fair to say that they probably have as much clout financially as many countries. And so the countries we just talked about, the US, Russia, China, all publicly coming out, but we're also, I think, have to take into consideration companies like BlackRock and Fidelity that are just massive financial organizations who represent global wealth, um, wanting ETFs, trading in the ETFs, and of course now holding, I think, between the two of them, about 1 million Bitcoin, which
Oh.
a year ago today, they didn't hold any
Mm.
because there was no ETFs a year ago today. So just fascinating over the last 12 months, what has happened. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thanks a lot for that insight. Yeah, yeah, interesting news, especially when you talk about, yeah, big countries now showing active interest in the subject and
Yeah.
probably trying to figure out to themselves now what would be a good next step. So, yeah, thanks for that.
Well, my pleasure.
And we'll see you. We'll see you. Hope to see you soon with some more news.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right.
All right. See ya.
Bye bye.
Bye.